Welcome to the Rebel's Edge, where we break down for you unusual activity. Could be in the stock, could be in the options. And yes, once again, 3 out of the 4 stocks we're talking about today had unusual activity prior to a big move. You want to know which? Stay tuned. Remember, folks, if you want to know more about trading options, not only should you listen to us, you should go all the way to there and check out marketrebellion.com/get started, because there are ways to turn a 3% dividend yield into 20%. All you got to do is know what you're doing with options, and you don't have to do it every day. You don't even have to do it every week. You could do it once a month, Pete, and take a cash flow situation like Apple, where, yeah, they give you a little bit of a dividend, but wouldn't you feel better about an 18% dividend than a 2% dividend? Well, we can show you how with options. Go to marketrebellion.com/get started. All right, Pete, we're getting started. He is, of course, still Pete Najarian. I'm Jon Najarian. Jared Wenkman is still recovering from a bad tooth. And hopefully that'll get taken care of as we go into the weekend.
That's it pulling his tooth out.
Yeah, he'll be the happiest guy in Chicago when that happens. But let's dive into the macro minute, Pete. I'm going to say David Rosenberg, he came out today with a scorching piece that follows on the heels of Jerome Powell, who said that the Congress needs some adult supervision, follows on the heels of Jamie Dimon, and he basically said, look, my economic indicator, he calls it his full model, says there's an 85% chance of a recession in the next 12 months. That's the model's highest reading since the great financial crisis, 2008, Pete.
Yeah, well, and those are big shooters that are saying these kind of things, right? I mean, you're talking about Jamie Dimon, you're talking about Powell. I mean, that's something that I think we should all listen up and follow along with what they're saying, at least look into it, if nothing else. For my macro, John, it's right there exactly in the same spot, just without the individuals. I'm just saying that CPI that came out yesterday, it's amazing, or this morning rather, it's amazing. And that core being up 0.4% certainly does have a lot of folks in a bit of a nervous spot right now, right? I mean, the markets all of a sudden just absolutely got wasted to the downside, down 500 on the Dow early on. It's been bouncing around ever since, but it just shows you the power of something like this. It's why the Fed calls this their indicator. It's what they look at the very closest.
Yeah, and Pete, you're so right, because there are so many disingenuous headlines, I'll call them, where people say something like, oh, the CPI didn't drop as much as expected. No, that's not what happened. It went up. It didn't drop as much as people thought it should drop. It went up. So, I mean, that's just a terrible headline by some lazy writer or somebody who's trying to carry water for the administration when they should just be reporting the news. If it's up, it's up. If it's down, it's down. Just give us the news. We don't need your editorializing. Well, this one, Pete, what do you think about this one? What are they going to say about this? Fantastic futures.
Fantastic futures.
I'm going to say, Pete, for fantastic futures, crude oil, because it was up to almost 78 today. So what are they going to say? Well, crude oil year over year is down $3 or something like that. Is that the headline? No, it's crude oil is higher. We're going to be paying more for stuff to get delivered. We're going to be paying more at the pump. You're going to be paying more for airfares, everything, because when crude oil goes up, they move prices up, right?
Yep, they pass it along right to us, John. It's a thing of beauty. Anyway, the other thing, and I'm going right back to CPI again, but I'm doing it in this form, the 10-year. Take a look at the 10-year and this big bounce that we've got to the upside, John. We've gotten back on up over that 4%. We've been there, and we hit 4.29 today. Now, it may even gotten higher than that since the last few minutes, but I will tell you this. What's interesting is you got to go all the way back to December 4th to get a number where it is right now. So you're having to go back almost a full 2 months or a little more than 2 months. It's interesting to see where we are right now. Do I think it's done going to the upside? I really don't. I think that there's a little bit more room, and it's a possibility we see something closer to 4.5. Now, we continue to get any kind of odd data that is way off. We were at 5% once. We could get there again. I'm not saying we are, John. I'm just saying if the data comes out that way, we might start seeing this thing rise again.
You know what's weird, Pete, is that the CME tool that not only do they tell you, what the likelihood of the Fed moving, they actually, if you dig into it, you can see how many times they're predicting cuts this year. That tool is saying 5 this year. The only way we're going to be cutting 5 is if there's a disaster going on in the stock market, because the Fed has already said, Jerome Powell and the rest of them have said 3. They've been very transparent. They said 3. So if you and people that are putting money on the line are thinking that it might be 5, that means that you are in the David Rosenberg camp. You think we're going to see a severe recession and or a banking crisis. And New York City Bancorp, NYCB, and a couple of others are a little shaky right now, Pete. So worth paying attention to, folks.
Sure.
All right. Let's take a look at Tripadvisor, Pete, because last night after the close, they said, you know what? We're exploring strategic alternatives. And whenever somebody says that, folks, that means I'm for sale. I'm for sale. I'm looking for a buyer at a price higher than where the stock's trading. Well, you know what? They were buying calls, Pete. They had unusual activity in the calls of TRIP. Take a look where the stock was then. And they were buying the February 20s. Well, Pete, how much of the February 20s is going to go up from the 70 cents people were paying for them when it was an $18 stock to now that it's a $26 stock? Now they're worth $6. So that's probably closing in on a 10x return, Pete. Cash flow, baby.
It certainly is. And that's why, the unusual options, there are people out there who will poo-poo it, John, right? I mean, I'm kind of cleaning it up when I say that because they don't understand it is why. And what do I mean by they don't understand options? They don't understand leverage. Why is it that options are being used more now than ever before? Because people have educated themselves or gone to places like Market Rebellion to try to figure out why is the options market so great? And it's great because of the fact that you do have that leverage and everybody can kind of tag along in something as crazy as NVIDIA that's trading at close to 800. I mean, all these things, it gets pretty expensive, but it gives people an opportunity to use that leverage. This Tripadvisor is interesting though, John, that volume off the charts. And it should be because of the fact of what they said. And exactly like you said, that special committee that they have assigned this chore to actually sell this thing. And I think they probably get this thing done. 5 or 6% short interest. Those shorts aren't feeling very good, John. And I don't know that they're going to get a chance to be able to do anything other than force this thing up if they need to cover some of that stock. And when we look at first 90 minutes of the day, 6 million shares, it averages 2.7 million shares for a full day. So it's busy, it's active, and this thing has jumped pretty good, and it might not be done.
Yeah, I think you're right, Pete. And what he's also right about, folks, is options are mainstream now. Now, when I point to you collectively, all of you watching, listening, you may have never traded an option. It's time you learned about them by going to itsnotanoption.com, because we'll let you have a free book. You can claim your free book at itsnotanoption.com. But you know who uses options a ton? Carl Icahn. And Carl happens to be making a big bet, Pete. He's now a 9.9% owner of JetBlue because he thinks it's too cheap. I guarantee, Pete, I guarantee he's got a lot of OTC options. Carl usually does that, folks. He usually sells puts and buys calls. He sells the put because that generates cash, and he buys calls with that. And he does this. This is, in some people's minds, it's a zero-cost collar. But if he doesn't have the stock, he is instead just getting massively long, and he's doing it on somebody else's dime. He bears the risk when he does that. So don't just go out and do that, folks. But he is getting bigger and bigger in JetBlue, Pete. And I thought that was pretty interesting today.
It is, and it's something that, they're already in this position where they have the issues going on with Spirit and trying to make that merger happen. They're still working on it, but it's something that's been a long time in the in the waiting for this thing to get any kind of an approval. I don't know if they will or not, but you look at the cash burn of the company. I'm just going back to the fundamentals itself. You look at the cash burn; it's pretty high. It's almost $700 million. So that's pretty high. I look at it from a short perspective, John. They're not feeling very good with Carl there. But it's still sort of sitting right in the middle of the last 52 weeks. And we're talking about a little over $3 all the way up to close to $9.50. And here we are today trading a little bit under $7. So somewhere very close to the middle ground right now for where it is and where Carl's probably been accumulating over the last couple of months to get to that number of 9.9%. It should be pretty interesting to see how this unfolds. They got a brand new CEO. And she's sitting there today, John, going, wait a minute. I had to cancel 20 flights or 20% of our flights. I've got issues going on the East Coast. And now I've got this guy coming in here. And what does he want to do? He's going to probably want to meet and try to figure things out and get this thing done with Spirit and all the rest of it. It's going to be a very interesting time, and it's going to be challenging, I think, for that CEO as Carl's going to step in. And, we already know he's going to want board seats. He's going to want this. He's going to want that. Mm-hmm. This is going to be a very, very interesting run over the next 6, 9, 12 months or so.
Yeah, I would keep an eye on that one, folks. JBLU, JetBlue. All right, TDC, Pete, Teradata. This is cloud software, and apparently it's softened up a lot. It doesn't help that the market's down. As Pete said, it was one time down 500 points in the Dow, and the NASDAQ down almost 400. But Teradata moves to the downside by 11% last night after the bell, Pete. They kept moving down. Right now, they're down double that, down 22%. And you know what? It's another one where there was unusual activity. And it works both ways, folks. This was put buying. So take a look at that with the stock. Basically, it's over $40 a share. They're buying a lot of puts, March 40 puts. Well, stock traded beneath 37 today. So making a big move to the downside. And anybody that owned puts in there is a happy camper today, Pete.
They are. There's a lot of guys running around pretty happy about how things look. And what they did, John, Teradyne, was, wow, the Q1, that looked terrible. Some of the estimates that they were throwing out there absolutely looks awful. Then you look at the full year, that looks terrible. They're looking at 215 to 231. They were expected 237 for the full year. None of this looks good. Everything looks pretty bad. There's a good reason why this thing is very, very close to those 52-week lows, John. And I wouldn't be shocked if it maybe tests that one more time even today if the markets continue to have a big negativity in front of them. Or maybe it's tomorrow, or maybe it's the next day. But regardless, this is a stock that is definitely having a really difficult time. And I don't see anything in the horizon anyway that shows me that these guys are ready to start moving back up to the upside. So there's a lot of problems, a lot of headway. And I think those put buyers, that was great. But you know what? You better be disciplined because you never know. Something can happen, whatever it might be. I think that a lot of the folks that are involved there understand that. So there's something there where that's when discipline really does step up, and you've got to step up yourself and make sure you've got it.
Yeah, and keep in mind they were buying the March 40 puts, folks. So they think that, they thought, whoever they are, that the stock would go down, or they wanted protection one way or the other between now and March. We're here, Pete, in the middle of February, so they got more time for these puts to go deeper in the money. But I agree with you. Pull some money off the table, maybe roll down. That's what Pete and John are doing with positions. We can't tell you guys what to do because we're not your financial advisors, but I think you should be disciplined, just like Pete said. Mm-hmm. All right. How about Children's Place, Pete? They said precarious financial position. That's what some of the analysts are saying. And they're saying distressed conditions are getting worse. Oh, God. And they said, Pete, that the net debt is something that's pretty dang alarming. And these are the analysts looking at this one. The stock is trading down hard. And you know what? Yes, there were puts being purchased in large quantities here as well, folks. So again, a put is a bet to the downside. So with the stock at $22.04, as you see on the top of that screen, it traded down today to $13.45. That's a huge drop, and the right to sell it at 21. Well, when it's at 13, Pete, it's worth about $8. So I'd say whoever was in this one, 10x. That's cash flow, baby. That's cash flow.
And you've said 10x a couple of times today, and you've been right to say it because that's exactly right. I'll tell you, John, when you look at Children's Place, first of all, I've never understood it in the first place. But second of all, I'm amazed that it's still even around. I really am, because they have been just kind of hanging around. I mean, to your point, it's down on its lowest legs. I think today it was down at least 30+%. I saw it down as low as 11. The 52-week low is in the 8s, so that's something. You mentioned debt. I'll just say what it is, $550 million worth of debt. They do have a cash burn. And oh, by the way, those shorts are getting pretty happy. At some point, they're going to cover. I don't know when, but it's 16 to 20%, somewhere in that range, John, of the short interest, which is a very large short interest. So they should feel pretty daggone happy about it. And if we see this thing start ticking to the upside, my guess would be it would be the shorts, not people that are bullish, but the shorts maybe saying, all right, I'll cover it here and start buying back some of their stock. But, you know, everything about the company makes me pretty nervous, and I have no interest in ever trying to bottom this thing out. I think that at some point this thing might go, I don't know, like some of these other retailer types that are out there that have been around for a long time, and you just wonder, when is it going to stop? Well, I think for Children's Place, it ain't that far away.
Sears, JCPenney, Kmart. I mean, it happens so often, folks. Yeah. Even to big giants, because those were all giants at one time, Pete. Kresge, Kmart, and so forth. But I think
Bed Bath and Beyond.
yeah, Bed Bath and Beyond. Sometimes people buy them just for the brand name. I know a bunch of folks that have been doing that, you know, saying basically, well, but the brand is good if we get better management, and maybe we don't have bricks and mortar stores anymore. But Pete, I was just noticing it took another leg down. Now it's at $11 a share. So that's $10 in the money. Those puts that were bought for, I think, 80 cents or so, maybe 90 cents. That means it's much better than a 10x here, Pete, because this thing is absolutely cratering. All right, enough talk about that. If you'd like to learn more about how we do what we do, how we see that unusual activity, go to marketrebellion.com/get started. That's marketrebellion.com/get started. It's right there on the bottom of the screen. All right, Pete, let's talk for a little bit about this video, because I know you're going to like this. This was training camp this year, Chiefs training camp, and watch it and then kind of listen with us as we enjoy Travis Kelce, the defensive back, as well as Mahomes, kind of discussing how he gets open and what the back has to do to keep him from getting open.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
He's trying to hold him. He still can't stop him.
Good route 87. Once you're here.
Good route 87.
Don't let me get that space. Yeah. If you stay on me, as long as you're not here, that's still. Yeah. You know what I mean? I'll let you body me out. I gotta try and keep inside.
Only spot I can throw the ball.
Yeah.
You have great coverage.
Yeah.
Both of them, really.
Yeah. Hey, man. This is what it's about, though. We're going to be sharp.
That's the great part, John, is the kid actually did have great coverage. But it just shows you that, you know, those tight ends, and it's why I've always been a huge advocate of tight ends forever, not just in the last couple of years. I'm talking forever. They just got to box you out. It's like basketball, right? And if they use that, and we'll talk about that a little later when we hit a little something with Harbaugh, but it just shows you a big guy like Kelce, and like most tight ends in the NFL, let's be honest, if they're going up against a smaller safety, they should always be open. It's why those safeties need to be 6'2" or 6'3", just to be able to defend those kind of guys, John. But, you know, Reed was right on him. I mean, he couldn't have been closer, but because he boxed him out like a basketball player, you just watched Mahomes. As long as Mahomes puts it right there, which he usually does, it's why he's the MVP. That's why Travis Kelce's unreal as well, because that ball, if it's delivered right, you can't stop it.
Yeah. And I'll tell you the only thing that can stop it, Pete, and that is, we'll show you tomorrow, folks, but that is if your offensive line does not do their job.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that the defensive player was good enough to jump up in the air and block, get his arms up and block the pass. But if they can't create a passing lane for the quarterback, that's one reason Mahomes is so damn good, Pete. And for that matter, Purdy, because they can run to the open spot where the hands aren't going to be able to be up there and block the pass, because they're not just going to stand back there in the pocket like a stiff. You know what I mean? I mean, there are 7-step drop quarterbacks, 5-step drop quarterbacks, and then there's a bunch of guys that can do both. And Purdy and obviously Mahomes is the best at it, Pete. Mm-hmm. And if you don't let that guy do what he does, you're stupid. And that's, by the way, is why I think Justin Fields could be so good for the Bears someday when we get him the right blocking and the right receivers. But we'll see when that day comes, Pete. All right.
Maybe even the right coach.
Yeah. Eberflus might not be the guy. Is that what you're saying?
Well, if he doesn't let him play the way he should. I've always said about quarterbacks, John, you draft the quarterback for what he is, not what you think he should be. And a lot of the time they make that mistake of saying, all right, I'm going to get RG3, but I'm going to make him be a pocket quarterback. It's like, well, why did you draft him then? It's that simple sometimes. All right, John, we're going to joke. You and I both played all kinds of sports in high school. I skied like you did. I ran track like you did. We both played football to a higher level, all the way up into the pros and everything. That's why we love to hit this sports stuff. But I will say this. I'm the only Najarian brother who ever played basketball. And it's kind of fun because I'm looking back, John. So the top 10 this year is kind of the usual top 10 of the last 4 or 5 years, and it moves around a little bit, but you've got UConn, you got Purdue, you got Houston, you got Kansas, you got Marquette, some of those.
Gonzaga.
They're always going to be there, right? Those teams. And then North Carolina. I mean, there's just names that are always there. But one name that hasn't been there since 1979, but they're there right now, and they're being ranked. They're number 23, Indiana State. Now, people will say, well, why the hell do we care about that? I'll tell you why. That was Larry Bird. And I think if Jared could send the picture up, I'd like you to see what the center looks like right now. There he is. Thing of beauty.
Looks like one of the Hanson brothers from Slapshot.
He does. So he's got the goggles on, John. Robbie Avile. 6'10". He's a great kid, great player. And that team is rolling right now, John. They've won 11 of the last 12 games. Now, granted, you could say, well, they're in a different conference. They have played some big boys, and they've played some of them pretty tight. But it's just kind of a fun thing, I think, to see Indiana State kind of back. They haven't been there since the days of Larry Bird. John, here's some of the stats on the team. They're averaging 85 points a game, which is somewhere in the top 10. They're shooting 39% from three-point land. That's number 9 in the country. They just seem to be a team that we're going to be excited about, and I think everybody might be talking about these guys with March Madness. So I think it's just kind of fun to see that. And do you remember those days? Because that was the days of Magic Johnson at Michigan State, and then, of course, you had Larry Bird at Indiana State, a powerhouse for many years before. Yeah, I'm sure. But it's pretty great, isn't it, John, to just see that it's not always, there's somebody out there, and every year there's some team that everybody kind of falls in love with. I'm going to say this team this year in March Madness, they're going to fall in love with these guys.
No, you're probably right, Pete. I mean, at our high school, folks, Pete and I went to Minneapolis Central. And at Minneapolis Central, there were, probably, 6, 7 kids on the team that could dunk from anywhere. And that's when you figure out, as a white boy on that team, that your role is going to be to box out.
I was the boxer.
You're going to box the heck out of people.
I was a good boxer outer, and I try to use my thickness to kind of intimidate the other players too, if I could. It didn't always work, but I tried it anyway, John.
Oh,
it was the best approach, I think.
You remember Big Money Griff, Pete?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Andre Big Money Griff.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell
Anyway.
you what, and that high school put a lot of guys into the NBA. As a matter of fact, Chet Holmgren, who plays for Oklahoma, Oklahoma, down there at in the NBA,
OKC.
yeah, is a beast. And his father and I played together at Central, and he played at the University of Minnesota for a while. John, how about we jump off into the football side of things again with Jim Harbaugh? So you and I both already knew he was going to the right spot, right? He was going somewhere where they had a great quarterback that he could coach and put him into position, probably different than the previous coach. And so I think, they're a 5-12 team last year. I actually think that they potentially could be a 12-5 team this coming year. And here's why. They're not that far away. They've got a great quarterback. They've got some big receivers that are still pretty good. The problem they've got right now is on defense. But from the offensive perspective, I think that Jim Harbaugh is going to do this, John. But how ironic is this? He comes from a place at Michigan where he had 3, 4, 5 tight ends on the field at any one given time. Well, at the 5th pick in the draft, there's a possibility that they might announce as the 5th pick in the NFL draft from Georgia, Brock Bowers. And it seems like it almost lines up too easy for him to get that pick right there. And I wouldn't be surprised at all. Now, Bowers coming off an injury and everything else, but tight ends are a big deal. Jim needs them. They don't really have the kind of tight ends that he wants. He wants a big, bulky tight end who's going to get out there and press people around, run the football. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see, John. And I think that's why he could turn this quick, because he did it with the 49ers. I think he does it with the Chargers. What are the biggest headwinds that he's got, though, right now, do you think? And I would say it's defense and a bunch of old guys that you love them, but can you keep paying some of these guys? Khalil Mack had a great year, but can you afford to keep paying him if the defense isn't really showing much? The only thing in it, and he did a great job, he was getting sacks, but it's going to be interesting to see how this thing unfolds on the defensive side of the ball, I think, for the Chargers.
Yeah, it will be, Pete. And, I went on the Bolts website, as you guys probably know. Their nickname is the Bolts because the lightning bolt on the helmet. Yeah. But they have them going after a wide receiver in the first round, Pete. And, just because we don't know who will be available for sure, they put Quentin Johnston from TCU. And yes, I said Johnston because that's his name. It's not Johnson. They have Thule from USC, Pete, the big edge rusher. All he was Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year. Yeah. That guy's going to get taken pretty high. He might not make it to the second round, but if he does, somebody will be lucky to get him. And edge rushers like Will Anderson, Pete, I remember last year at this time, you and I were talking about him. Now he's the AFC rookie, or not just AFC, he's the defensive rookie of the year because that guy is a beast and help turn that team around along with Stroud. So I think this is a tailor-made pick for, even though he's not as, like you say, big and bulky, he's not like a 6'7", 265-pound guy, but the kid out of Georgia is a beast. And all he does is catch the ball and loves to hit people, Pete.
If they take him, John, he'll be coming home. The kid's from Napa. He'll be back there in California. I mean, how amazing is that? He's a kid out of Napa, California, goes to the University of Georgia. And if he gets drafted out there, I understand where LA is in relative to Napa, but nonetheless, he'd be back in California. That'd be a pretty interesting kind of round trip. Be kind of fun. I like what Jim Harbaugh brings to the game again, though, John, because he's going to bring that running game, those big linemen, big tight ends, and I think the NFL is ripe for him because of that, because everybody else has kind of slid over and they're trying to be nothing but throwing the ball and everything else. And I think the reality is you still got to run the football.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that more tomorrow, Pete, because you have some observations on the Kansas City defense and Spagnuolo. That's their D coordinator, right, Pete?
Yep. He's the stud. He is a stud.
Wow. And if you watch the films like Pete did, folks, I think you'll see something pretty special out of their defense and why they confused those offensive linemen for San Francisco. Anyway, thanks for joining us, folks. We appreciate it. Make sure you check out marketrebellion.com/get started. That's marketrebellion.com/get started. You can see all about our educational offerings. If you're somebody who needs to learn, if you're somebody who wants a subscription, we got a bunch of them. We'd welcome you into the Market Rebellion family. We appreciate all you joining us today. We'll be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time.